Hello, everyone, and welcome to Edbert Leadership. I trust we are keeping well. I will be making a big announcement soon, and in addition to the podcast, so I'd like you to, like every one of us, to stay tuned and look out for it. I was pondering on the concept of authority and culture recently, and how authorities are driving forces within us. So, in today's podcast, on this very windy Saturday evening, I want to talk about from parents to TikTok, the authorities living inside us. You must have noticed that in my podcast, I reference, a lot of the time, the concept of authority and leadership, emphasizing the distinction between them. Authority is a position that people hold, while leadership is an activity. It's what people do. It's what people carry out. And so recently I've been thinking about the importance and value that authorities play in our lives at various stages. And I have a question for you. Why do you stop at a red light at 2 a.m. in the morning when the streets are empty? Or why do you sometimes hear your parents' voice in your head years after leaving home? That's authority. Not just outside us, but inside. Now, as humans, we are unique in that we most times don't need authority figures physically present to guide us. We internalize the lessons of parents, teachers, our faith leaders, mentors, and other authorities, carrying their voices in our conscience. Now, this is especially important for our children, for teens and young adults who are in a critical stage of absorbing values and norms. Authority figures play a powerful role in this process. Their leadership, guidance, and example do not just shape behaviors in the moment, they echo into the future. When leaders, or who I refer to authority figures, exercise their authority with integrity and vision, they plant seeds of responsibility, respect, and moral clarity. Their words and actions become the inner compass that young people draw upon when making decisions later in life, even when no one is watching. So you see, when young people are influenced by the right authorities, they internalize the lessons of a healthy culture, learning the behaviors, the ethics and habits that will shape how they interact with society as adults. Conversely, exposure to unreliable or negative influences can lead to distorted norms and subcultures that perpetuate dysfunction. Now, this is why it is vital for parents, for teachers, for mentors, and for authority figures in our society to use their voices intentionally, cultivating trust and modeling the kind of values they want to see flourish. Authority is not merely about enforcing rules. It's about building a conscience in others that will guide them long after supervision is gone. So in today's episode, I want to explore 7 ways authority lives in and around us. From Socrates hundreds of years ago to TikTok, from Rome to remote work, and why the voices we internalize today matter for the culture they will carry tomorrow. And the first point I want to make is authority as conscience. As humans, we are pretty unique in this. We don't need constant supervision to follow norms. We absorb lessons from parents, from teachers and leaders until they live inside us. Now, that internalized authority makes it possible for large and complex societies to function. Now, think about today. You see, young people don't need influencers to be present in the room. A TikTok creator's advice or a YouTuber's worldview can live in their minds long after the video ends, shaping how they act. Or consider the workplace. You have employees, often they follow compliance training or safety standards even when no one is checking. Why? Because authority has been internalized as conscience. I have a question, a rhetorical question. Have you ever caught yourself doing the right thing? Not because someone told you to, but because that voice inside said, you know better. But the voice inside us isn't just one voice, it's a whole choir. So, point number 2, I want to talk about the choir of internal voices. You see, in our daily lives, we are constantly being pulled in multiple directions. A young man hears his mother's voice, the voice of his faith conviction, the temptations of his friends, and his own inner desires. That struggle is timeless. You see, as we grow up, we don't just internalize one authority, we collect many: family, peers, teachers, religious upbringing, what we got in the workplaces, and they all live competing voices and values inside us. And they don't always agree. And that can feel really, messy. Yet this conflict also gives us freedom, the ability to weigh, to compare, and to choose among them. Now, take the immigrant professional who comes in, for example, a young doctor who's trained in the UK. He may feel the pull of family expectations from back home, while also navigating Western workplace norms. Take a university fresher, and that comes home because I have a fresher going into university, for instance. On campus, they are surrounded by new freedoms and peer influences, parties, late night study sessions, choices about relationships and lifestyle. Yet in the back of their mind, they may still hear their parents' voices urging discipline, reminding them to focus on grades. That's why we sent you to school. Stay safe, or uphold cultural and religious values. And at the same time, they hear the voice of professors and mentors who have pushed them to think critically, challenge assumptions, and pursue independent thought. These voices don't always align. Parents may stress stability, while peers encourage risk-taking, and lecturers emphasize intellectual exploration. The fresher must navigate this daily mix of expectations, weighing which voice to follow in different moments. And though it can be challenging and messy, this negotiation helps them develop their own identity and conscience, shaped by not wholly determined, not by the authorities they carry inside. So what happens when the voices inside you don't agree? When your boss, your parents, your friends, and your conscience all say different things? That tension can feel exhausting, but sometimes, and most times I dare say, it is the very friction that drives human creativity. So in my third point, let us talk about conflict as creativity. Conflict isn't always destructive. It can be a source of innovation. When different voices compete inside us, we are pushed to think harder, reconcile opposites, or invent something entirely new. Look at the artist who straddles multiple cultures. They take the tension of different identities and turn it into a hybrid: music, literature, or film. The same is true for people of faith. God does not impose his thoughts or force his voice upon us. Instead, he whispers, he nudges, and invites us to choose him in the midst of countless competing options. The very act of choosing God's thoughts is considered an act of worship and meaningful because it emerges not from compulsion, but from discerning choice, weighing other voices and freely aligning with the divine. Or consider entrepreneurs. They often stand at the crossroad of risk and caution, hearing one voice urging safety and another urging boldness. By wrestling with these conflicting pressures, they carve out entirely new ventures, companies, technologies, movements that wouldn't exist without that inner tension. So perhaps our best ideas don't come from a certain peace of mind, but from inner arguments and struggle. And once creativity takes hold, authority doesn't vanish. It adapts into something portable, carried across distances and generations. So in my fourth point, I want to talk about portable norms and culture. All right? Interesting. The Roman Empire offers a striking example. Roman laws and customs and citizenship spread across vast territories, making people act Roman, even if they never set foot in the city. Roman identity was portable, a kind of authority people could carry with them. That's the power of cultural norms. They act like invisible rules that travel inside us. Now, we see a similar legacy in the British Empire. Norms of dressing, dining, and daily etiquette became deeply rooted in its colonial territories, often persistent long after independence. The ritual of afternoon tea in India, the wearing of suits in African parliaments, or even school uniforms in the Caribbean, all testify to cultural authority that has traveled across generations. And these legacies are not just relics of the past, they continue to shape modern life till date. Business dress codes around the world often echo British formality, with the suit and tie serving as a global symbol of professionalism. Educational systems in former colonies still mirror British structures of exams and uniforms. Even cuisines bear traces of empire, with curries in London or Caribbean spices in British kitchens, creating cultural blends that endure to this day. Now, in this sense, colonial authority outlived the empire itself, becoming a portable set of norms that still travel inside people, shaping identity and behavior in a globalized world. I have a rhetorical question for you. What makes someone Roman even if they never saw Rome? Or an Apple employee even if they never stepped into the Cupertino? But culture alone isn't enough. For societies to hold together, they still need former anchors of authority. So my fifth point, I want to talk about the role of authority systems. All right? Is this getting interesting? So you see, the Catholic Church in medieval Europe functioned as that anchor, a central authority reinforcing norms across different regions and generations. Even when culture is strong, institutions provide coherence. They ensure that values don't drift and that trust is preserved. Authority systems, whether religious, political, or legal, act as reference points for the whole community. We saw this during COVID-19 pandemic. Even though most people knew basic safety measures, trust in institutions like the WHO or other health authorities in various countries was critical to guide behavior at scale. Or consider the courts in various countries that reinforce the rule of law across a diverse and divided society. So we need to look at the question, even with strong cultural values, who keeps the rules from drifting apart? Think about that. Who holds the center when everything else is in motion? But what happens when those authority anchors collapse? So that brings me to my sixth point on breakdowns and subcultures. Authority breakdowns rarely lead to freedom. They usually lead to new, often darker forms of authority. When mainstream authority collapses, people seek alternatives. Sometimes these substitutes offer belonging and some sense of order, but they can also perpetuate dysfunction and distrust. Take street gangs in neighborhoods where families, schools, and policing fails. Gangs provide structure, loyalty, and rules, a twisted version of authority. So I have a question. If people can't trust mainstream authority, where do they turn? And what kind of leaders rise to fill that void? But you see, yet even in stable times, authority doesn't disappear. Often it transforms into something symbolic. And my seventh and final point is to talk about authority as a symbol. And we see that in the British monarchy. is one of the clearest examples. The crown no longer rules, yet it still symbolizes continuity, tradition, and unity for millions. In stable societies, authority often shifts from practical power to symbolic meaning. Humans seem to need a figure or symbol at the center, something to glance toward, even if it no longer governs directly. Rhetorical question: why do we still look toward crowns, flags, or figureheads, even when those figures no longer have formal authority? Authority can change things, but it never does vanish. Authority lives in us as conscience, multiplies into competing voices, sparks creativity, travels through culture, anchors societies, collapses into subcultures, and endures as a symbol. So the real question isn't whether authority exists, it always does. The real question is, which voices are you letting guide you? And which voices are you silencing? Now, this matters not only for individuals, but for a society as a whole. When the right authorities, parents, teachers, mentors, faith leaders, or role models invest their voices with wisdom and integrity, they shape the conscience of our teens and young adults who are still at a critical stage of absorbing values. Now, these young people, in turn, carry forward habits of honesty, discipline, and respect that ripple out into the wider culture. A healthy society doesn't emerge by accident. It is built on generations of good authority being internalized and passed on. But the opposite is also true. When unreliable, selfish, or destructive voices dominate, they don't just distort individuals. They warp communities, creating circles of dysfunction that are hard to break. That is why choosing whose authority we allow into our conscience is one of the most important decisions we can ever make. So as you think about your own life, as you caution your kids and you send them to school, as we think about freshers that are going to school, it's important to look at which voices are worth carrying forward. Which voices will you allow to become part of your inner compass? Because the health of our culture and the future of our society depends on it. I hope this has been useful. My thoughts on culture and authority and how it's important that we think about it and also the relevance of authority in our lives.